Hello, and welcome to Whole You Frequency podcast. My name is Laura, and I'm here only for one reason. I believe that there is still some space for one more podcast. This podcast, and actually what I'm trying to do here, I want this to exist in order to redefine what healing actually means and how we understand the human system. Because, in my opinion, we have reached the point, both scientifically and culturally, where the traditional frameworks of medicine, psychology, wellness no longer fully explain the complexity of the human experience. People are more aware, more sensitive, and more internally attuned than ever, yet they're also more fragmented. The purpose of the space is actually to bring forward a different architecture of understanding the body, and one in which psychology, your physiology, your emotions, your perception, and your informational field are understood as one integrated system. I'm not here to offer self improvement strategies or to tell you how to fix yourself. I'm here to actually teach and show a different way of seeing, one that resonates with coherence, not through effort, but through understanding the true nature of the human system. And you probably noticed that I love just to go straight to the point. So I think that the starting point for understanding healing is actually recognizing that the human system is profoundly intelligent. I am sure that you heard that quite a few times. But I also believe that sometimes we need to hear the same sentence enough times to fully hear it. So your body is not a passive structure that it's waiting to be acted upon. It is dynamic, it is self-organizing, it's continuously adapting field of biochemical, neurological, and electromagnetic processes that are all regulated according to the information that system perceives. So when I say that healing is not something that we learn, not something new, but it's something that we remember. I mean that the system already holds the actual inherent blueprint for coherence. There is a template for regulation, a pattern of physiological harmony, and natural rhythm of emotional movement and a wave, and a state of internal orientation that organizes perception, behavior, and biological expression. What disrupts that most of the time, this is not lack of intelligence, but interruption in communication. The system sometimes loses the access to parts of itself. The layers stop speaking to one another, the coherence dissolves, not because something is broken in the system, but because the system has reorganized around a necessity, usually through survival, protection, adaptation, relational patterning, rather than some kind of regulated uh, functioning. So, in other words, the body is always compensating for something. And compensation, it's not a failure that it's easy to see it that way. Compensation is actually evidence of the system perceiving what it perceives at the highest priority, which is stability. If the system believes that digestion needs to slow down in order to maintain actual vigilance, it will do so. And we have to know it. If the system believes that emotional expression is not safe at that place, it won't do it. Like it will reroute the emotional chart somewhere in the body where it becomes inflammation, muscular tension, chronic pain, or fatigue pattern. If the system believes that relaxation would lead to vulnerability, the nervous system will maintain a baseline of activation that keep the person in constant readiness. And all these outcomes like anxiety, shutdown, fatigue, digestive dysregulation, autoimmunity, chronic tension, these are not random problems that we are seeing in people. They are forms of organization. They are the body doing what it believes it is must to do to maintain continuity under the conditions it has learned to expect. And I really want you to take some time and allow it to land in your system because it can be a lot to start understanding these concepts. This is why addressing the symptoms directly kind of rarely produces lasting change. And when we attempt to adjust the body chemically without explaining and examining the underlying coherence patterns, we are interventing at the level of manifestation, at the level, not at the level of origin, right? The origin of dysregulation is not chemical imbalance. And chemical expression is kind of secondary to perception, memory, relational conditioning, emotional history, developmental environment, and the informational field that shapes the organism. The body responds to meaning long before it responds to the molecules, any type of chemical molecules. And there are so many beautiful researches that show that your body is 100 times more sensitive to electromagnetism than to any chemical interaction. And the meaning, the electromagnetism, the magnetic field is formed not only by what we think, but what the system stores as a true base of experience. The mind may believe that I am safe now, while the nervous system can continue to operate as if constant vigilance is necessary. This is why mindset work alone does not create the physiological coherence. The mental narrative cannot reorganize the system if the emotional body and the field are not part of the process. And I promise that in this case, I just want to give you some brief information, and you can decide if this is something that you want to invest your time and energy in, because we will have episodes when we're going to actually dive specifically into certain bodies, into organization of the bodies. But right now, I really want to give you the brief understanding in this first episode what it's all going to be about. And when we talk about what it's going to be about, this actually brings us to the structure of the human system. It is helpful to understand the system as not separate layers, but almost like a dimensions of the same intelligence. The physical body is such a dense expression. It's our densest expression, right? The emotional field organizes affective patterning, how emotion moves, how it's felt, how it's expressed, or it's inhibited. The mental perceptual layer actually organizes meaning making and interpretation. When we say the word meaning, you have to understand that it has a lot of meaning for your system. And beyond those actual layers, there are field layers. There are electromagnetic and subtle body structures that holds the blueprint for the coherence. These dimensions are not independent. They are interdependent. They're in the constant communication with each other. And when one is impacted, the others will adjust. When the emotional field is suppressed, the body compensates. When the mental body dominates, the emotional body loses access to the movement and fluidity. When the field body holds and resolves patterns, whether personal, DNA level, or ancestral patterns, the nervous system will organize around them. So healing is restoration of communication, actually, between those layers. It is the return of the system to the state where the physical sensations, emotional signals, mental interpretations, and field level blueprint are aligned rather than competing. We don't want them to compete for attention. When the system is coherent, actually the body can receive very clear instruction. Hormones can regulate without effort, digestion can follow the natural rhythm, sleep restores, and emotion moves and releases instead of accumulating in the tissue. The mind is clearer, perception can be wider, the relation between self and environment can feel more grounded and resourced. Coherence, it is not the state of perfection. It is the state of communication. The reason why many people feel fragmented is because they learn to separate these layers early in our life. When we have a child who cannot express anger, they will internalize the emotional energy into the body, creating some patterns of contraction. A child who cannot safely rely on the caregivers will develop nervous system pattern that prioritize vigilance, independence, self-protection, or emotional scanning to actually anticipate the threat. These patterns become our identity, not because they reflect the true self, but because they reflect the adaptive self. And the adaptive self is not wrong. It's simply incomplete. When the adaptive patterns actually continue into adulthood without the opportunity for actual reorganization, the system can become extremely rigid. When system is rigid, certain symptoms can appear. The body begins to signal that its current mode of organization is not longer sustainable. And that's absolutely normal, because how long your body can actually keep that? That's a huge question, right? This is where the most approaches to healing actually break down. They attempt to modify the outcome without actually addressing the architecture that produces the outcome. There is no such a thing as one root cause. There is usually a pie chart of reasons that are actually reinforcing each other and creating the condition. Diets, supplements, somatic practices, therapy modalities, all of those beautiful modalities can be useful, and they are, but only when they are integrated into the framework that actually understands the system at the level of electromagnetism and coherence. You can change what you eat, but if your nervous system does not feel safe, if your nervous system has DNA level imprint or 3 generations back imprinted trauma, it won't feel safe. Digestion won't optimize. You can process the emotion cognitively, but if emotional field has never had a capacity to actually move and become to its own fluidity, the release cannot occur. You can try to relax, but if the field doesn't have the memory, like the reference, the measurement point of relaxation, well, you will never reach that point, and the body will return to the contraction. The mind will start running. So that's why the key is not to force the body into a different state. Because a lot of times when patients and clients come, they want to shift the state. And when we're shifting the internal state, we can achieve a lot. You know, people that make the most money in this planet are the people that can change your state instantly, right? So we have to shift the internal conditions that determine how the system organizes. Healing actually occurs when the system has access to the new pattern of coherence. This can happen gradually, this can happen suddenly, and we will go into the different layers of ours and we'll see how every single layer, what kind of laws it's actually following. Obviously, it can happen through somatic release, through recognition, through relational presence, through frequency-based intervention, or through the shifts in environment or internal signaling. But however it occurs, it is always the same mechanism. The system receives new instructions, remembers a more coherent blueprint, and reorganizes accordingly. This is why I do not define healing as improvement, because improvement usually implies that there is something wrong that must to be corrected. Healing, in my opinion, is not correction. Healing is reconnection. When the system actually remembers itself, when the symptoms dissipate because they are no longer required as a stabilization mechanisms. The body no longer needs to hold attention to maintain the certain emotional or mental control. The nervous system no longer needs to actually stay activated to maintain vigilance, right? The digestive system no longer needs to slow down or actually constrict to compensate on the lack of safety. As the system actually resynchronizes, physiology recalibrates without force. And it is essential to understand that healing cannot be rushed. The system reorganizes at the pace of safety. Safety is literally precondition for coherence. Safety is also not a cognitive belief. It's a psychological state and physiological state. A person can intellectually know that they are no longer in danger, but the body has not experienced that consistently enough regular presence, and the system will continue to operate according to the earlier imprint. Healing requires actually creating the internal conditions for the systems to reorganize so it can stop compensating. And this is why presence is healing intervention, not emotional catharsis, not mental insight, presence. The ability to be with internal experience without contraction, avoidance, or overriding it. Presence is not passive. Presence is, in my opinion, the most active and powerful organizing force in the system because it allows your system to renegotiate stored memory and sensation. When presence is actually anchored, emotional energy can move. When emotional energy moves, the body releases its protective responses. And when the protective responses release, the field bodies can actually reestablish the communication with the physical, emotional, and mental layer. And when those subtle bodies are online, the blueprint of coherence becomes available again. This is the essence of the work, actually restoring coherence to the system by reestablishing communication between the layers of self. I do not work at the level of symptoms, right? I really want to work, and I always do, at the level of informational architecture of your system. When the instruction changes, the system changes. When the system changes, the symptom resolve because they are no longer necessary. The mind will always try to make healing more complicating than it is. Don't get me wrong, it's really complex. It will look, your mind will constantly look for techniques, protocols, methods, strategies. But the reality is that healing is an emergent property of coherence, as crazy as it sounds. When coherence is restored, the system heals because it is designed to do so. It saves energy. The primary task is actually reorganizing where communication has been disrupted and supporting the system to actually return to the unified function. And as we move forward in this series, we will explore how these concepts actually express in the physical body, in the symptom level, in the sleep patterns, in the energy levels. We will look at how emotional fields encodes the memory. I call it memory field a lot of times. How unexpressed emotions actually hold the charge in the tissue. We will definitely discuss mental and perceptual layer, how it influences everything and creates our reality. We will examine how these subtle bodies actually carry informations across generations and how certain DNA and ancestral patterns are not psychological stories sometimes, but energetic imprints and imprints in your field. And I really want to make sure that you know that this is not about acquiring more tools. This is about learning how the system actually works so you can stop working against yourself, because this is so loud and I see that all the time. When you understand the architecture of the body, you will stop forcing the change and actually instead you will start supporting the coherence. And when coherence is restored, the healing flows and the system knows the way back. Our work here is simply to remove the interference and actually let it remember. So if this is something that you like, I highly invite you to actually subscribe this podcast, and there will be a lot of episodes when we're going to break down the things. I know that I haven't introduced myself, and one thing about me, I never follow any rules in this. I never follow the rules of marketing. I never follow the rules how I'm supposed to do the podcast. And I don't think that I ever will. So if there's a curiosity, I will bring that in the next episodes. But as of now, I don't think that the personal story is relevant. And, I'm not here to tell you my story. I'm actually here to show you, to teach you, to give you different data points to recreate what healing and health actually means for you. As always, as I say to every patient of mine, that please check in with your own data points. Like if there is resonance in the things that I'm saying, please stay tuned. Like there is so much that I want to share. But if there is something that you don't resonate with, you don't have to. Please check in and see what you want to take in your system and what you want to leave somewhere in the void. So thank you so much for listening up to here. And I know that one thing that I cannot give back to you is your time. And I value that. I value that probably more than you can imagine at this moment. But I know that if you're going to stick around, there's going to be so much valuable information that most likely going to change the meaning that you provide to health, healing, and so many more things. Thank you for listening.